Nipsey goes down. The guy starts walking away, comes back, shoots him again.
For the past 7 years, people across the world have continued grieving the devastating loss of Nipsey Hussle. Even after all this time, his name still dominates conversations, his music continues motivating millions, and his influence on the culture hasn't faded one bit. Fans have honored his memory through tributes, documentaries, interviews, and an endless stream of posts online. But while the public spent years celebrating his legacy and revisiting the tragedy surrounding his passing, one perspective was noticeably missing the entire time: the perspective of his daughter. And now, after years of staying completely silent, that's finally changed. In a development that surprised a lot of people, she's stepping into the public eye and sharing a moment that has fans emotional, nostalgic, and looking at the family's journey in a whole new way. What happened next wasn't just another story making headlines. For many longtime supporters of Nipsey Hussle, it felt like one of the most powerful updates they've received in years. The moment that set social media on fire began with what appeared to be a simple post online. For nearly 7 years, fans heard virtually nothing directly involving Imani. She stayed away from interviews, she avoided making public comments, she never appeared in major magazine stories, podcasts, or widely promoted media appearances. While millions continued discussing Nipsey's impact, breaking down his business moves, and reflecting on his untimely passing, Imani remained largely out of the spotlight. She chose a private life while the internet stayed locked in on every new chapter connected to her father's legacy. Eventually, that silence simply became expected. Most people assumed she had no interest in living under public scrutiny. Then, during the closing days of May 2026, everything shifted when a single Instagram post suddenly surfaced and changed everything. The photo was shared through the account @ChinyHussle, the page belonging to Imani's mother, Tanisha Foster. At first, it looked like nothing more than a typical graduation picture, but once fans took a closer look, the emotional weight of the moment became impossible to ignore. Imani stood proudly wearing her graduation cap and gown, celebrating one of the biggest accomplishments of her young life. Standing beside her was her mother, proudly sharing in the special occasion. On the other side was Samil Black Sam Ashgedam, Nipsey Hussle's brother, and one of the main people entrusted with preserving and carrying on Nipsey's legacy since his passing. The caption couldn't have been any simpler. It read, "Congratulations to my baby." Just 4 words, no lengthy statement, no emotional essay, no detailed explanation, yet somehow those few words spoke volumes. Within hours, the photo spread across social media like wildfire. Fan accounts immediately started reposting the image. Hip-hop blogs and media outlets quickly turned it into a major story. Publications including Revolt, The Griot, and Gossip all covered the touching moment. Thousands flooded the comment sections with emotional reactions. Many were stunned by how much Imani had grown. Others couldn't believe how quickly the years had passed since Nipsey's death. And repeatedly, one message kept showing up everywhere: the marathon continues. Fusion Academy operates very differently from a traditional school system, using a one-teacher, one-student approach designed to give every student a personalized educational experience. For many students, that kind of setup may simply be a matter of preference, but for Imani, it likely offered something far more important: the ability to grow and learn in privacy. Being the daughter of one of hip-hop's most respected and beloved artists meant living under non-stop public attention from a very young age. Millions of people recognized her name long before they truly knew her story. That's why so many people believe a school centered around privacy and individual support was exactly what someone in her position needed. Still, the graduation itself wasn't the detail that affected fans the most. It was when it happened. Nipsey Hussle, born Ermias Joseph Ashgedam, was tragically killed on March 31, 2019, outside his Marathon clothing store in Los Angeles. The loss sent shockwaves throughout the world and forever changed hip-hop culture. At the time, Imani was only 10 years old. She was just a child trying to make sense of an unimaginable tragedy. Fast forward a little more than 7 years, and that same little girl was now crossing a graduation stage as a young woman stepping into an entirely new chapter. For many supporters, that realization was overwhelming. It served as a sobering reminder that while heartbreak never fully disappears, life continues moving forward. But there was something else hidden in that graduation photo that many fans believe carried even deeper meaning. Standing next to Imani were two people who had once found themselves on opposite sides of a very public legal battle over her future. Casual observers may have missed it completely. However, those who followed the family's journey immediately understood why the image resonated so strongly. For years after Nipsey Hussle's passing, Tanisha Foster and Black Sam were involved in a widely discussed legal dispute concerning Imani. The case drew major media coverage and sparked intense public debate. It was a painful period marked by court proceedings, emotional strain, and difficult disagreements. That's exactly why seeing both of them standing together peacefully, smiling beside Imani during such a major milestone felt almost unreal to many fans. The photograph symbolized far more than a graduation. It represented healing, maturity, and perhaps the end of a chapter many once thought would never close. That lengthy and emotional custody battle officially reached a resolution in March 2025 when both parties agreed to joint custody. After years of courtroom disputes, public attention, and emotional challenges, an agreement was finally reached. What makes the graduation photo even more remarkable is that only 14 months later, the same people who once faced each other in court were standing side by side, celebrating together. No lawyers, no courtroom tension, no visible conflict, just family, smiles, and a young woman enjoying one of the biggest moments of her life. For those who followed every twist and turn in this story, the image represented something much greater than a diploma. It symbolized peace after years of pain. And that's precisely why one simple photograph managed to take over the internet. To someone unfamiliar with the family's history, the image may have looked like nothing more than a proud family celebration. But for those who have followed Imani's journey since losing her father, the image carried a far deeper significance. The reality is that public glimpses of Imani have been incredibly rare throughout the years. Looking back, there is surprisingly little available. Very few public appearances, very few personal statements, almost no media presence whatsoever. In a time when many celebrity children grow up in front of cameras, Imani spent nearly her entire childhood away from public view. One of the last major moments many people remember took place in April 2019, only 11 days after Nipsey Hussle was killed. At his memorial center at the Staples Center, more than 20,000 people gathered to celebrate his life and legacy. It was one of the most emotional events Los Angeles had witnessed in years. At the time, Imani was only 10 years old. She was just a child trying to make sense of an unimaginable tragedy. Fast forward a little more than 7 years, and that same little girl was now crossing a graduation stage as a young woman stepping into an entirely new chapter. For many supporters, that realization was overwhelming. It served as a sobering reminder that while heartbreak never fully disappears, life continues moving forward.
Became overwhelming. She simply couldn't continue. The pain was too much for a 10-year-old child carrying such an enormous loss. Eventually, she stepped away from the microphone without finishing. Lauren London then handed the microphone to Cross so the service could continue. It became one of the most heartbreaking moments of the memorial, and millions watching around the world felt the weight of that silence. Then, only 2 months later, another deeply emotional moment unfolded. In June 2019, during her elementary school graduation ceremony, Imani briefly shared her voice once again. Standing in front of classmates, teachers, friends, and family, she delivered a short speech that instantly touched people everywhere. She thanked her mother for always believing in her. Then she thanked her father for always being there for her. What struck so many people was the way she said it. She referred to him in the present tense, not as someone she had lost, but as someone she still felt with her every day. Considering that only 2 months had passed since his passing, those words hit fans incredibly hard. The clip spread rapidly online and became one of the most emotional reminders of the bond she shared with her father. After that, the public rarely heard directly from Imani again. The years passed with almost no visibility. In 2021, another brief glimpse surfaced when a video appeared showing Imani singing Whitney Houston's "I Will Always Love You." She was only 12 years old at the time, yet the performance immediately captured widespread attention. Many supporters viewed the song as a touching tribute to her father. Whether that was intentional or not, the emotional connection felt undeniable to viewers. The clip quickly went viral, drawing millions of views and heartfelt reactions. But just as suddenly as she returned to public attention, she quietly stepped away once again. Over the years that followed, fans only caught occasional glimpses into her life. A birthday tribute here, a family photo there. Sometimes a short TikTok video would make the rounds online. Other times a relative might share an update on Instagram. But one thing remained consistent. Those updates always came through family members rather than public interviews or statements from Imani herself. She never turned herself into a media personality. She never tried to build fame from her father's name. Instead, she chose to grow up privately, away from constant public attention. And that's an important point many people overlook. This was never a story about running from the spotlight. It wasn't about hidden drama or unresolved family issues. It was about loved ones making the deliberate choice to protect a child who had already experienced unimaginable heartbreak. They chose privacy instead of publicity, healing instead of headlines, personal growth instead of constant attention. For 7 years, Imani was given the opportunity to live life outside the relentless pressure of celebrity culture. Looking back now, many people believe that decision may have been one of the most important choices her family ever made. Many people now believe that privacy may have been one of the greatest blessings Imani's family could have given her. So when that graduation photo surfaced in May 2026, it symbolized far more than simply receiving a diploma. It was evidence of resilience. It showed that the little girl the world remembered standing silently at a microphone back in 2019 had continued pushing forward despite every obstacle placed in front of her. Through the devastating loss of her father, through years of unwanted public scrutiny, through legal disputes unfolding around her, through carrying the weight of being connected to one of hip-hop's most cherished icons, somehow she persevered through it all. And for countless fans, that realization was just as emotional as the graduation milestone itself. But to truly understand why this moment carries so much meaning, you have to rewind even further, before the cap and gown, before the courtroom battles, before the tragedy that changed everything forever. You have to go back to where Nipsey Hussle's story first began, because the principles that helped shape Imani, the relatives standing beside her, and the legacy she now carries, can all be traced back to one man who never turned his back on the neighborhood that made him, the boy from Slauson. Long before the world knew the name Nipsey Hussle, he was simply Ermias Joseph Asghedom. Born on August 15, 1985, to Eritrean immigrant father Dawit Asghedom and African-American mother Angelique Smith, he was raised in South Los Angeles, primarily in the Crenshaw and Hyde Park neighborhoods. It was a community filled with challenges. Poverty affected countless families. Street and gang culture had a powerful presence. Opportunities often seemed difficult to find. Yet, even with those realities, his family's history in the neighborhood stretched much deeper than many fans realize. Relatives on his grandmother's side had owned property in the area dating back to the 1930s and 40s, establishing roots that extended across generations. This wasn't simply the neighborhood where Nipsey grew up, it was woven into his identity. Everything shifted dramatically by the time he turned 14. He moved out of his mother's home and went to live with his grandmother. From that moment on, much of his life was shaped by independence and learning to rely on himself. The support system many young teenagers take for granted simply looked different in his situation. Years later, during a candid conversation with DJ Vlad, Nipsey reflected on that chapter of his life with striking honesty. He never tried to romanticize the struggle. He never pretended those years were easy. Instead, he explained that those experiences forced him to mature early, ultimately creating the mentality that would go on to define both the man he became and the legacy he left behind.
It was like a combination of, just being out of age. I left my house kind of early.
How early?
Just how young was Nipsey Hussle when he had to begin navigating life largely on his own?
The answer surfaced almost immediately, and even now it still catches many people off guard. The truth is much heavier than most fans would ever imagine. It shows just how early real responsibility began falling squarely on his shoulders. And once you hear the full story, you start to understand exactly where the mindset, work ethic, and relentless determination that defined his entire legacy truly came from.
At just 14 years old, Nipsey was already being forced to navigate life largely on his own while living in one of America's toughest neighborhoods. Most teenagers his age were focused on homework, sports, and hanging out with friends, but he was confronting situations that would overwhelm many grown adults. Yet even during those difficult years, he never lost sight of his bigger vision. Music wasn't simply something he enjoyed doing, it was the mission from the very beginning. He truly believed a greater future was waiting for him. But, as many dreamers eventually discover, having a dream and paying for that dream are two completely different challenges. The obstacle was obvious. Making music meant paying for studio sessions. Studio sessions meant finding money. And in Hyde Park, legitimate ways for a young teenager to earn that kind of income weren't always easy to find. The streets often presented the quickest route to cash, and like so many young people raised in that environment, Nipsey found himself surrounded by those realities on a daily basis. Years later, when looking back on that chapter, he never attempted to rewrite the story or distance himself from his past. Instead, he spoke with complete transparency about the harsh realities of those years, explaining how the environment around him shaped many of the decisions he made while pursuing a future he hoped would eventually take him far beyond the streets.
I was doing things to try to get money so I could support myself. I always wanted to do music.
The streets Nipsey was growing up in were heavily influenced by the Rollin' 60s neighborhood Crips, one of the most well-known and powerful gangs in Los Angeles. But this is where many people often misunderstand his story. Gang involvement wasn't something passed down through his family. It wasn't a generational lifestyle. None of his immediate relatives were active in that world. His father came to America from Eritrea in East Africa, while his mother was raised around the Slauson area without becoming affiliated with gangs. Nipsey's connection to the streets developed for a much more complex reason. It grew out of the environment he was surrounded by every single day. Growing up in South Los Angeles meant dealing with realities that many people watching from the outside could never fully grasp. According to Nipsey's own accounts, remaining neutral wasn't nearly as easy as some people assume. He openly discussed being targeted, getting jumped at football games, and experiencing violence while still very young. Eventually, the pressure coming from the streets became impossible to avoid. The neighborhood demanded decisions. And for countless young people living under those conditions, survival often meant seeking protection, acceptance, and a sense of family wherever it existed. When Nipsey later reflected on those years, he described gang culture in a way that caught many people by surprise. He never ignored the dangers involved, but he also explained that for many young men who felt overlooked or abandoned, it provided something they struggled to find anywhere else: brotherhood, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. For kids who believed society had already written them off, that kind of acceptance meant everything. Eventually, Nipsey went through the initiation required by the set. He earned his standing the same way everyone else did. From that point on, he became known as Neighborhood Nip, a name that would remain attached to him throughout the rest of his life. What truly separated Nipsey from many others, though, was that he never attempted to erase that chapter of his story after becoming successful. A lot of artists distance themselves from their past once they make it out. Nipsey chose the exact opposite approach. He talked about it openly. He represented it through his tattoos. He referenced those experiences throughout his music. He carried that history into interviews and conversations about his life. Even as his fame continued growing, law enforcement agencies still associated him with gang databases and monitored him because of those ties. It followed him almost everywhere.
Yet instead of pretending his past never happened, he confronted it directly and told his story with honesty. Years later, when reflecting on the young men he came up with, Nipsey often spoke with both gratitude and heartbreak. He fully understood how unlikely it was that he survived and succeeded. By his own admission, many of the people he grew up alongside eventually faced prison, violence, or lives permanently shaped by the streets. The odds were stacked against them. He knew it. The neighborhood knew it. That's why he never viewed his accomplishments as merely personal victories. He saw them as proof that a different future was possible. That belief eventually became one of the driving forces behind everything he built. Because Nipsey didn't just leave his environment behind after finding success, he made it a priority to return and invest in the same community that raised him. As his music career began gaining traction during the mid-2000s, he built his audience the traditional way: no shortcuts, no instant fame. He moved project by project, block by block, and supporter by supporter. His marathon mixtape series evolved into something much larger than music. It became a philosophy, a way of thinking built around ownership, patience, discipline, and long-term vision. The marathon was never about moving fast, it was always about lasting. That philosophy reached another level when Nipsey released his Crenshaw mixtape. Rather than following standard industry practices, he made the bold choice to sell physical copies for $100 each. At the time, many people thought he had lost his mind. Who was really going to spend that much on a mixtape? Then the unexpected happened. Fans showed up and bought them. And in one of the most talked about moments surrounding the release, Jay-Z purchased 100 copies, instantly transforming the project into a cultural event. The strategy wasn't only about making money, it was about demonstrating that artists could determine the value of their own work instead of waiting for others to define it. Throughout his rise in the music industry, Nipsey repeatedly walked away from traditional opportunities that many artists spend their entire careers chasing. He turned down deals that required surrendering control over his music. He refused to give up ownership of his masters. He embraced independence during an era when many artists believed signing away control was simply part of the process. Many people believed that approach would hold him back. Critics doubted him. Music executives doubted him. Some even warned that he was risking his entire career. But Nipsey never wavered from the long-term vision. He wanted ownership. He wanted independence. More than anything, he wanted to create something that would continue long after he was gone. Then he accomplished something very few artists ever do. He reinvested directly into the same neighborhood that raised him. In 2017, he opened the flagship Marathon clothing store on the corner of Slauson and Crenshaw, the very area where he had spent years hustling as a teenager. To outsiders, it may have looked like just another retail location. To Nipsey, it represented something far greater. It proved that success didn't mean abandoning your roots. Sometimes success means coming back and helping rebuild them. But his vision extended far beyond clothing. He also became involved with Vector 90, a co-working and STEM-centered initiative created to expose young people from underserved communities to careers in technology and entrepreneurship. He understood that the future wasn't limited to music and sports. It also included coding, engineering, and innovation. He wanted kids from his neighborhood to gain access to industries many had never previously imagined for themselves. In many ways, he was building bridges between worlds that had remained separated for generations. He also used his platform to create employment opportunities for people society often overlooks. Many individuals he hired came from backgrounds that made securing jobs incredibly difficult. Former gang members, people with criminal records, individuals most companies would never even interview. Nipsey believed real community change required second chances. He wasn't interested in empty speeches. He wanted action. He wanted employment. He wanted opportunity. At the same time, he consistently pushed for unity in places where division had existed for decades. Through collaborations with artists connected to rival neighborhoods and rival affiliations, including YG, Nipsey showed a willingness to cross lines many believed should never be crossed. In a city shaped by long-standing territorial conflicts, those partnerships carried enormous meaning. Progress required collaboration, growth required conversation, and healing required people brave enough to take risks. By 2018, years of persistence were finally producing national recognition. His debut studio album, Victory Lap, earned a Grammy nomination for Best Rap Album. It was a career-defining milestone. The young man from South Los Angeles, who had spent years betting on himself, was now standing among music's biggest stars. That recognition validated everything he had sacrificed to achieve. But while the public celebrated the artist, there was another role that meant just as much to him: being a father. Throughout every stage of his journey, Imani was one of the most important parts of his life. Born in November 2008 during his relationship with Tanisha Foster, she was his first child and a constant source of motivation. Later, he entered a relationship with actress Lauren London, and together they welcomed their son Cross in 2016. Yet despite increasing fame and growing business demands, fatherhood never moved to the background. It remained central to who he was. In fact, Nipsey often discussed parenting with the same level of intention he brought to business. Before his passing, he sat down with NBA superstar Steph Curry and revealed one of the routines he practiced with Imani every morning during their drive to school. He explained that they repeated the same core values together every day: integrity, confidence, leadership, every morning, every trip to school. The repetition was deliberate. Nipsey believed values had to be reinforced consistently until they became part of someone's identity. He approached those lessons exactly the way he built businesses, with structure, with discipline, with consistency. He wanted his daughter to understand not only how to achieve success, but also how to carry herself once she achieved it. Integrity, confidence, leadership. Those weren't simply words to him. They were principles he hoped would continue guiding her long after he was gone. Then came one of the most unforgettable father-daughter moments the public would ever witness. In February 2019, Nipsey brought 10-year-old Imani as his guest to the Grammy Awards. Together, they walked the red carpet hand in hand. She wore a stunning gown, he wore a tuxedo. The photographs captured a moment that now feels almost symbolic. A father who had overcome incredible odds, standing proudly beside the daughter he hoped would never have to endure those same struggles. Looking back at those images today is incredibly emotional because they captured a future that finally seemed secure. The photographs from that evening showed a man who appeared to have reached the summit of everything he had spent years building. He was a respected artist, a successful businessman, a community leader, a dedicated father, a Grammy nominee. It seemed as though he was entering the most
See the shooter. He comes in from an alley off the side of this mini mall where the clothing store is.
The person captured on surveillance footage appeared to have no hesitation and showed no indication that he was reconsidering his actions. According to the video evidence, he moved straight toward the group gathered outside the Marathon store, the very same group where Nipsey was standing. Witnesses later testified that he made comments suggesting everything was settled before suddenly raising his weapons, transforming what had moments earlier been an ordinary afternoon into a tragedy that nobody present could have foreseen.
Guy fires shots. Nipsey goes down. The guy starts walking away, comes back, shoots him again.
And incredibly, the horror did not end there. According to the surveillance footage, the gunman initially walked away from the scene, giving everyone the impression that the violence was over. But just moments later, he suddenly turned around and made his way back toward the area once again. What happened after that stunned investigators, eyewitnesses, and eventually millions of people around the world. The video showed him firing again, adding yet another heartbreaking layer to an incident that was already almost impossible to process. For many who later studied the case, that detail made the tragedy even more unsettling, because what occurred was not a brief, impulsive moment. It was a series of actions that continued even after the original encounter appeared to have ended.
Walking away again, comes back, shoots him a third time, and then kicks him, and then runs back.
3 separate volleys.
What happened next was both devastating and almost impossible to comprehend. According to testimony and surveillance footage later presented in court, the incident involved multiple shots being fired before the suspect ran back through the same alley and headed toward a waiting vehicle. Inside that vehicle was Bria Nita Nicholson, who later testified that she had no knowledge of what was about to occur and was left shocked as events unfolded around her. Prosecutors ultimately concluded that she was an unwitting getaway driver rather than someone who had participated in planning the crime. By the time the violence ended, Nipsey had sustained numerous gunshot wounds, while 2 other men nearby had also been struck but survived. Witnesses later recalled hearing Nipsey make a final statement as he fell to the ground. Nearby, longtime friend and marathon employee Herman "Cowboy" Douglas rushed to his side, doing everything he could to keep him alive until paramedics arrived. Despite those efforts, the injuries were simply too severe. Nipsey Hussle was transported to a hospital, where doctors pronounced him dead at 3:55 p.m., approximately 35 minutes after the shooting. He was just 33 years old. The coroner later ruled the death a homicide, and testimony presented during the trial revealed the heartbreaking extent of the injuries he suffered. Almost immediately, one question echoed throughout Los Angeles and across the world. Why? Why would someone target a man who had dedicated so much of his life to uplifting the very community that raised him? As speculation and theories quickly spread online, many searched for complicated answers. But investigators closest to the case saw it much differently. In their view, this was not a robbery gone wrong or a random act of violence. Authorities believed it was a deliberate attack carried out by someone Nipsey knew, following a brief exchange reportedly connected to rumors circulating within the neighborhood. Just 2 days later, Eric Holder turned himself in at a mental health facility and was taken into custody. The suspect was now behind bars, but for those left behind, that did little to ease the pain. In many ways, the most difficult chapter was only beginning. A family had lost a son, a brother, a partner, and a father. And for 10-year-old Imani, life had changed forever. While the public remained focused on headlines, investigations, and court proceedings, a little girl was preparing to say goodbye to her father in front of the entire world. The grief that followed was unlike anything Los Angeles had witnessed in years. Murals honoring Nipsey began appearing throughout the city almost overnight. Thousands gathered at Slauson and Crenshaw for vigils, transforming the intersection into a place of remembrance and reflection. Perhaps most remarkably, rival neighborhoods and longtime adversaries united to organize peace marches in his honor. Residents witnessed scenes many once believed were impossible, people from opposing sides walking together peacefully, brought together by respect for the life that had been lost. Then, on April 11, 2019, more than 20,000 mourners filled Staples Center for Nipsey Hussle's celebration of life. The arena, which had previously hosted the memorial service for Michael Jackson, became the focal point of an entire city's grief. Fans, relatives, community leaders, artists, and public figures gathered to celebrate a man whose influence extended far beyond music. It was an emotional event, filled with memories, tears, stories, and heartfelt tributes that demonstrated just how many lives Nipsey had impacted. And it was during that memorial service that 2 of the most emotional moments in this entire story took place. The first involved Lauren London. Only days before the memorial, she had shared a deeply personal message on Instagram about the overwhelming pain she was experiencing. Her words resonated with millions because they captured the magnitude of the loss in a way few others could. She described losing not just her partner, but also her best friend, her safe place, and someone she viewed as her protector. Standing before thousands inside Staples Center, Lauren revealed something even more intimate. She shared a private text message she had sent Nipsey while he was sleeping just a couple of months before his passing. The message offered the public a rare glimpse into the bond they shared, away from cameras and public attention. As she read those words aloud,
complete silence filled the arena. It was one of those unforgettable moments that reminded everyone that beyond the fame, business ventures, and public legacy, there was also a family mourning someone they loved beyond words.
Feel safe around you, protected, like a shield over me when you're around.
She told the arena.
During her tribute, Lauren offered the audience something much deeper than awards, achievements, or public recognition. She gave people a rare look behind the scenes and introduced them to the version of Nipsey that only those closest to him truly knew. Not the Grammy-nominated recording artist, not the businessman, not the respected community activist, but the man his family came home to every single day. She spoke about someone who would lie in bed listening to audiobooks, always searching for new knowledge, wisdom, and personal growth. She described a devoted father who began each morning walking throughout the house with burning sage before the children started their day, hoping to surround his family with peace, positivity, and protection. It was an incredibly intimate glimpse into the routines and values that shaped life inside their home. And in that powerful moment, the crowd wasn't simply grieving a public figure. They were grieving a partner, a father, and a man whose most meaningful acts of love often happened far away from cameras and headlines.
Soul was majestic. He was the strongest man that I ever knew, a gentle father, a patient leader, a divine light.
And then came the moment that had the entire arena struggling to hold back tears. As Lauren prepared to end her tribute, she shared one final message that would remain with fans, loved ones, and supporters long after the memorial service was over. These weren't simply words spoken during a time of grief. They became a lasting symbol of the deep connection she shared with Nipsey and the incredible impact he left on so many lives. Even years later, people continue repeating that emotional goodbye because it captured the heartbreak, love, and resilience of that day in a way few moments ever could. In many respects, those final words became woven into the family's journey and remain a permanent part of Nipsey Hussle's legacy.
Grief is the final act of love. My heart hears you.
The second unforgettable moment from that memorial centered around Imani, and what made it so emotional was that she never actually delivered a speech. The 10-year-old walked toward the microphone intending to honor her father, but when the moment finally arrived, the grief became overwhelming. Standing in front of more than 20,000 people, she suddenly froze. The words simply wouldn't come. Overcome by emotion, she quietly stepped away from the microphone. Lauren London gently shifted the attention to young Cross, allowing the service to continue. But for countless people watching, that brief moment became one of the most heartbreaking scenes of the entire memorial. Inside an arena designed for music, applause, and celebration, the most powerful sound was the silence of a grieving child. Looking back now, that moment feels even more significant than it did at the time. It wasn't simply a young girl struggling with grief. It marked the beginning of a silence that would continue for years. The image of Imani standing before thousands of mourners, unable to speak about the father she had just lost, became permanently etched into the public's memory. For many fans, that was the last time they truly saw her in public. After that day, she slowly faded from the spotlight, and the world would only receive occasional glimpses of her life as she grew up far away from cameras and headlines. While Imani's silence reflected heartbreak, Nipsey's mother, Angelique Smith, delivered a message filled with an entirely different spirit. Rather than focusing on sorrow, she spoke from a place of faith, strength, and deep spiritual conviction. Her words caught many people by surprise. Instead of encouraging people to remain in grief, she encouraged them to heal. She spoke about peace, she spoke about faith, she spoke about finding strength in the face of unimaginable pain. Perhaps most remarkably, she insisted that her son's spirit and influence would continue living on. It was a message that challenged people to rise above their grief, instead of allowing it to consume them. Just 2 months later, signs emerged that Imani was beginning to find her voice again. During her elementary school graduation ceremony in June 2019, she stood before an audience and delivered a brief speech. During those remarks, she thanked her mother for believing in her and thanked her father for always being there for her. Those words resonated deeply because they revealed a child's determination to maintain a bond that death could never erase. It was only a short moment, but it reflected resilience, a glimpse of strength slowly emerging through unimaginable pain. Behind the scenes, family members worked tirelessly to protect her. They made sure she received grief counseling and surrounded her with love and support during one of the most difficult periods of her young life. Rather than placing her in front of cameras or allowing public curiosity to shape her childhood, they chose privacy. The family closed ranks and gave her room to heal. As the years passed, Imani largely disappeared from public view, focusing instead on growing up away from the constant attention tied to her father's legacy. While Imani was quietly rebuilding her life, the legal case surrounding Nipsey's death moved forward at an agonizing pace. The pandemic created significant delays throughout the court system, extending the timeline much longer than many people expected. More than 3 years passed before Eric Holder finally appeared before a jury. For Nipsey's loved ones, every delay meant additional waiting, additional uncertainty, and additional reminders of a tragedy they were still struggling to process. When the trial eventually began in June 2022, prosecutors immediately focused on reminding jurors exactly what had been lost. They described Nipsey not simply as a celebrity, but as a father, a son, a brother, an entrepreneur, and a respected artist. Their case centered on the idea that his death represented the loss of someone who had dedicated years to creating opportunities for others. It wasn't just about a criminal act, it was also about the lasting impact of the person who was gone. The defense faced an enormous challenge from the very beginning because there was little dispute regarding who carried out the shooting. Surveillance footage and evidence presented throughout the trial made that reality clear. Instead, defense attorneys pursued a different strategy. They argued that the shooting was not a carefully planned execution, but rather an emotional reaction fueled by accusations and personal instability. Their approach focused on portraying the incident as spontaneous instead of premeditated. Prosecutors strongly rejected that interpretation. According to their argument, the evidence demonstrated clear signs of planning. They pointed directly to the timeline. Holder left the scene. Time passed. He had an opportunity to calm down and leave permanently. Instead, prosecutors argued, he changed clothes, armed himself, and returned carrying multiple firearms. Those actions, they claimed, reflected preparation rather than impulse. Beyond the events themselves, prosecutors also suggested that deeper emotions may have influenced what happened. They pointed to possible jealousy and resentment, the frustration of watching someone from the same neighborhood achieve worldwide recognition, while another struggled to find similar success. Whether or not that represented the sole motivation, prosecutors argued that the overall evidence painted a clear picture of deliberate intent. After hearing weeks of testimony and reviewing all of the evidence, jurors reached their decision. On July 6, 2022, Eric Holder was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was also convicted on additional charges connected to the injuries suffered by the 2 surviving bystanders, along with several firearm-related offenses. The verdict provided a measure of accountability, but it could never reverse the loss experienced by Nipsey's family, friends, and supporters. Even while awaiting sentencing, Holder remained at the center of controversy inside the prison system. Reports surfaced claiming he had been attacked by fellow inmates and injured during an incident behind bars. The case continued making headlines, demonstrating just how emotionally charged it remained years after the shooting itself. Finally, on February 22, 2023, the legal process reached its conclusion. The court sentenced Eric Holder to 60 years to life in state prison. For the justice system, it marked the end of a lengthy legal battle. But for those who loved Nipsey Hussle, no sentence could truly heal the wound. The courtroom proceedings had ended, yet the void left behind by his death would continue to be felt for years. When Eric Holder received his sentence, he was 33 years old, the exact same age Nipsey Hussle was when his life was taken. It's one of those haunting details that causes people to stop and reflect. As of 2026, Holder remains incarcerated, living with the consequences of his actions and carrying a reputation that follows him everywhere. For much of the public, the conviction seemed like the final chapter, The person responsible had been convicted, justice had been served, the legal case was finished, the marathon could continue. But away from the headlines, another battle had been unfolding all along. It wasn't taking place in criminal court, it wasn't about guilt or innocence, it was unfolding inside family court, and at the center of that conflict stood the person Nipsey loved most, his daughter, Imani. The custody battle. Nipsey Hussle's death came during a period when his life was still expanding in every direction. He was only 33 years old, building businesses, growing his brand, and planning for the future. Reports estimated that he left behind an estate worth approximately $11 million, with his children, Imani and Cross, listed as primary beneficiaries. But while financial matters attracted public attention, money was never the real issue at the center of the conflict. The real battle was never about money, it was about who would help raise and guide Imani after losing her father. On one side stood Tanisha Foster, Imani's mother, who believed her daughter should remain with her. On the other side was Samil Askadem, Nipsey's older brother and one of the key figures dedicated to preserving everything Nipsey had spent years building. In the months following Nipsey's passing, Black Sam petitioned for guardianship, setting in motion a legal fight that would continue for years. Court hearings continued to stack up. Legal documents became public. Blogs, media outlets, and social media users quickly picked sides every new development, ignited fresh debates across the internet. Yet while arguments intensified, adults battled in court. A young girl found herself caught in the middle of a conflict she never chose. Multiple reports suggested the lengthy custody dispute added even more stress during one of the most painful periods of her young life. Every trip to court served as another painful reminder that the one person who could have settled everything instantly was no longer here. Then, without fanfare, the conflict finally ended. In March 2025, after years of legal proceedings and disagreements, both sides reached a joint custody agreement. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, no clear victor, no crushing loss, just compromise, a truce. For the first time in years, the attention shifted away from legal paperwork and back towards family. The dispute that had cast a shadow over much of Imani's teenage years had finally come to a close. And that's exactly why the graduation photo shared in May 2026 struck such an emotional chord with so many people. Look at that image again, but this time remember everything that happened before it. Imani stands proudly wearing her cap and gown. On one side stands her mother, Tanisha Foster. On the other stands Black Sam. The same two people who spent years locked in legal battles over her future are now standing together, smiling for the same photograph and celebrating the very same milestone. No tension, no courtroom drama, no visible signs of the conflict that once dominated headlines. The caption itself couldn't have been any simpler. "Congratulations to my baby." Only a handful of words, but behind those words sat years of history, pain, and healing. The post was shared by her mother. Members of Nipsey's family embraced it. Fans reposted it across every major social media platform. Hip-hop blogs quickly transformed it into headlines, and suddenly a